Hi, I'm Katharine Ashe, author of The Prince, and you're watching Author's Voice.
Hi everyone, this is Somali and you're watching Author's Voice, where we connect authors to the world. This is actually Lit with Love, where we connect you with romance authors. And our guest today is the very lovely Katharine Ashe, who has recently, I have the pleasure of saying, is my dear friend Katharine Ashe, whose talent I'm amazed by, whose advocacy I'm amazed by. So thank you so much for being here, Katharine.
Thank you for having me, Sonali. This is an honor. Thank you.
This is great. This is going to be great. Thanks so much for being here. Before we start, a few things. If you're watching this live, and you can send us questions so you can be part of the conversation. If you're watching it on Facebook Live, then you can just type in your comments. If you're watching it on YouTube, I think there's a button that you can submit questions and use. Also, we're going to be discussing this gorgeous book, The Prince, from Avon Books. It's $7.99. You can order signed copies. You can order signed copies too, but you can order signed copies, and Katharine will be signing them for us today. Thank you so much, Avon Books, for sending us Katharine, and thank you everyone for watching. So welcome again, Katharine.
Thank you.
And let's start this. It's Regency, and it is the story. Well, I will let you tell them what it's about, but I have to say that, well, it is the story of this woman who tried to get a medical education in 1825 and had to dress as a man to do it. My grandmother, about 100 years after that, went to medical school and colonized India. And something about this book just felt so deeply personal to me for many, many reasons. And we'll talk about those. But let's start with you telling our readers a little bit about the book.
I would love to, but before that, I have to say, I would rather just talk about A Distant Heart, I'm going to say, I'm having a huge fangirl moment right now, and I've been having a huge fangirl moment since we met. I'm just going to start off with, I read A Distant Heart 3 times in a row because I loved it so much. It's so beautiful, and I'm absolutely, I'm so honored to be here talking with you. Thank you. Thank you.
Gosh, no, but can
we just do that? Can we just talk about your books? All of your books, A Change of Heart.
I so badly want to say yes, but I don't actually want to say yes.
No. If we do the Prince thing, then all right. So, so this is a story about a young woman in 1825 who is determined she wants to become a surgeon. And women weren't allowed in the highest ranks of the medical profession in the early 19th century. They weren't really until toward the end of the 19th century in Britain. She's a Scot. She is an orphan who was raised by a physician who gave her an unusual education, and she's an unusual young woman in that she is really doggedly determined to follow her passions. And she has the idea of, she starts with the idea years before the novel begins, of dressing up as a youth to treat poor sailors at the docks and other folks at the docks in Leith. The novel takes place in Scotland, mostly in the city of Edinburgh, but also partially in the port town of Leith, which is just a couple miles away from Edinburgh. And she had that idea, and she got a friend who's a seamstress to make her, men's clothing, and so she was able to do that. Well, she takes it a step farther, and at the beginning of the book, we find her in a surgical theater, which were open to the public, and they were very popular for an anatomy lesson, which is essentially a week-long series of dissections of a human cadaver in order to teach students, medical students and surgical students and physicians and surgeons, and it's open to the public, so there are journalists there and then just people who want to see something spectacular. This was public entertainment in some ways. So she she goes dressed as a young man, and she fools everybody except one man, a man she met 2 years earlier, who, when she met him 2 years earlier, had drawn her face. He is an artist. He's a portrait artist. He's a foreigner living in Edinburgh. He's from a place on the, well, we don't know at the beginning, but he is living mostly reclusively, and he's drawing and painting portraits, and he very rarely paints or draws portraits of women. He's mostly doing groups of people, couples and children and what have you. And he sees her with her whiskers glued to her face, and he recognizes her. And she thinks, oh no, my chances of actually studying as a young man are ruined, because he'll tell everybody, but he doesn't, because he has secrets he's hiding, and he's understands her. Well, then she comes up with the idea that if her father leaves for the year to London, and she's supposed to be living with a friend, and instead she comes up with the idea that if she moves into his house, because he lives essentially alone, if she moves into his house and takes on another identity as a young man, she can actually study medicine for an entire year, and she does so. And in return, he requests only 2 things of her. The one thing is that she leave him essentially alone. She let him do his work in his studio, and of course, yeah, that never works. And the other is that she allow him to paint her or to draw her for at least 1 hour a week, every Sunday morning. And the adventure begins.
Yes, and what an adventure it is. It's so many things in what you just said about why it feels so deeply personal. Is, I think, one of the things about it is this mad love that they both have for the thing they do, right? Which for us is, I mean, I can't imagine that it doesn't. We know exactly what that feels like, and
absolutely.
to see that, and I just feel like that mad love for what you do is really behind so much change, right? And I loved that they both loved what they did, and in so many ways, I just loved this mirroring and this this duality to the story, where she wants to be let in, he's been shut out. She fights for something without ever questioning it. He's become afraid to fight for stuff. So let's start with talking about your process and where this story came from, and how, was that how those 2 characters together, what that means to you.
The Libby, the heroine, she appeared to me in a book several books earlier. She was a younger half-sister. She's the, bastard, I say that word, the half-sister.
All the words on the show.
All the words.
We encourage it.
Yeah, okay, lots of the good words. So, so she appeared to me, so the very personal part of Libby's story is that when I was beginning to write the series, in the first book, Libby occurred to me as a young woman suffering from or experiencing, she was a teenager at the time, experiencing obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors, and troublesomely. And the reason that she occurred to me like that was that we had just come out of a really pretty horrifying time in my family's life, where my son was very ill with really severe OCD, and she was the character that wanted to occur, and she was a minor character but an important character, and she lent some humor and some intensity. She was a kind of comic relief, but not comical in the sense of her behavior, but simply because she was a very bright, energetic character. And she occurred to me that way, and he was also in the same novel, but in a completely other role, entirely masked. He's never named as himself in this role. He's secretly painting portraits of, I don't want to give spoilers for that book, but he's secretly painting portraits and of women. And I thought, he is hiding, as you say, and she is. Damon Suede, we know Damon very well, we love Damon, and Damon, I heard it was one of those writers, and he said, just as I was starting to think about their novel, the novel of these 2 characters, he said something in one of these writers' workshops. He said, give your characters verbs. And I immediately knew their verbs. And Libby's verb is push, because she pushes. She pushes all the boundaries. She pushes people's patience. She pushes her own abilities. She's constantly pushing at the borders, right? She's saying, no, this is not an okay border, and bursting through it. And his verb at the time was hold. And it came to me, and I thought, what is that all about? What is it? And then I think I realized, as I was developing the characters, that he is, he's a prince. He's a prince in exile who has gone through some pretty horrifying history. But he has come to a place where he is learning to, he has learned to nurture. And he holds her while it's as though he allows her, he gives her a structure he gives her a safety, he gives her a place, a base from which she can go and push and do these things, and there's always the safe place to come back to. And that is while they're still completely separate. I mean, they're together because they're living in this house essentially alone. So yeah, so I think that they came organically, they occurred organically, and I think of a hero and a heroine together as a DNA strand that gets, however, more closely entwined until it's completely entwined. So if you can imagine that kind of spiral of two strands, and that is really the dynamic of their story.
I hadn't thought of that, but that's perfect, because the holding and the pushing, when you're pushing hard at something, you do need that. Almost in terms of physics, you need to be held, right? So that is just such a beautiful connection.
Where the one scene in the book comes from, where she is falling apart,
yes.
and and that comes from real lived experience. So
knowing that when you have to hold someone, you have to hold them.
Sometimes you have to actually hold them. Yeah.
It's deeply personal again. And that shows. So it's funny that you said the thing about the pushing, because one of the lines, many lines in this book stood out to me. But this one where she says, where he says to her, "You have no understanding of the word no, do you?" Yeah. And that's everything. And that's not just everything with this story. That is again everything for all change.
Yeah.
Right.
And she says, her reply is, if I had that understanding of the word no, I wouldn't be where I am now, and neither would you, neither would any change. She actually says
that,
yes. No change would happen, nothing. And I'm thinking about, women in medicine, if like your grandmother and women in medicine worldwide had not pushed and said, simply, this is what must happen. Yeah.
Yeah, and women in everything, right? In every field, women and everybody else who's ever held back from something. And then that also comes back to that loving something so madly that the word no does not mean anything, which is not to nullify all the people who've had no choice but to take no. But I think that so many people I always think of it as all these women, like we're standing on their shoulders, right? People, women like Libby and my grandmother. And some of it was visible, some of them pushed to no avail, but the pressure for it's the last straw, right? The tip of the arrow is what finally breaks through, but it's everything else that brings it there, and it's just beautiful. Yes, everywhere. Which is, I wasn't going to do this because one of my favorite metaphors is your chocolate cake story. And I make you say, I have to have Katharine always tell this because this book is so much about change. I feel, not in even in an overt way, but the underlying theme is so much about change. But having said that, and I have Kat Sebastian, who is also a historical author, and brilliant.
Author.
I'm going to read actually her tweets out because I'm getting so excited.
You know what? We're going to save the chocolate cake story for online, or
okay. We'll see. If we have a moment, I do want you to tell it because it's such a great metaphor. But so Kat said, I enjoyed this book so much. Of course, it's just beautiful. But she'd been in a huge historical reading slump, and this got me out of it. In particular, the heroine is strong and fierce, despite occasionally being basically non-functional due to OCD. Libby is goal-oriented in a way that I especially like in historical romance. She has goals for herself, and it's not seen by her or her love interest as selfish. She wants to be a doctor because she wants to be a doctor. No apologies, right? It's not because she wants to affect change. It's not because of it. But that kind of, I think, encapsulates everything about Libby. But again, having said that, there was something about both these characters where their character arc was, I think, a little bit different from anything I've seen recently in a novel, not just in a romance novel, where from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, they don't change because they're essentially both such solid people. They change their circumstances. So the arc is almost them, which again ties in with the pushing and the holding, because they cause the world around them to change, which is making them who they are at the beginning. So it really is more the fact that they change the circumstance.
I'm totally gonna cry. I'm a weeper, so when I feel, I weep. But I never thought of that. Because of course, as novelists, we're told the character must have an arc. The character must move from this place and end up in that place. But in many ways, I think you're right. They simply force change in their circumstances. And they force change for themselves, but also for each other. They make choices in order to allow the other person to pursue the passion, right? They understand each other's passions, even though their passions seem, she makes a point to him about how she's all about the bones and muscles and goiters and what have you, and he's all about the beauty of the external. And he says, no. He said, well, they have lots of conversations about this, right? It's both about the soul, right? It's both about allowing the health of the body so that the soul can, and Libby's all about healing people so that they can continue to do what it is brings them passion, and he's all about bringing out the beauty that is hidden from the world that society hides from the world.
It's about seeing, right? And one of the things that you said as you were explaining the book is, what I loved is that he sees her, right, in the beginning, and he just knows. And one of my favorite, talking about tears and being weepy, the parts in this book that made me tear up were every single time another woman meets her, they know. And the men do not know.
The men do not know.
I mean, it's all the same. She is, she acts like a man. She's done all this work. And when a woman sees her, she knows. And when he sees her, he knows that this is not a man, this is indeed her. And seeing is about capability, right? Seeing is about accepting what the person is capable of. So when
for what they are, for who they are.
Exactly, right? But that's a matter of what you believe someone's capacity and capability is, which is why for a very long time, when women were seen, they were seen as incapable of certain things. So if you pretended, it was easy to pretend in some ways, right? Because of course that couldn't be a woman. She's in medical school and she's smart and she's great at what she does. Of course she couldn't.
This causes Libby no little despair, right? Yeah. Because I mean, when she bothers to despair, because she's not a despairing sort, but yes. she does have these moments when she realizes that the reason that I play with secret identities and hidden identities in most of my novels, and I've had heroines and heroes too, but especially heroines before think that the only reason that he or they don't react the way I expect them to is because they don't expect that I'm capable of what I am actually capable of. So to me the stories about telling the story of who someone is inside, and the bravery and the courage and the strength and the persistence despite what others perceive on the outside, I end up telling that story over and over again in one way or another.
It's beautiful because that's what you're trying to explore in the world, right?
Well, it's what gives me passion, right? Yeah.
Yes, and so those moments where he sees her, and to him, it's possible that she can be all the things without that mask, right? And so that's why that connection between the women. So when Koira, when Koira sees her, when the nurse sees her at the end, and the housekeeper, like all the women just take it as possible because they know what we're capable of, right?
Yeah.
And that's just the most beautiful thing. So this connection between women, to me also with a lot of romances, it's although on the outside it's a story between a man and a woman, but there's always that thing about men being in touch with their feminine side and women being in touch with femininity as a community.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was beautiful. Is that so? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I mean, I love that about that. That is one of my favorite things about romance novel. I think one of the reasons why I'm going to go back to A Distant Heart and Change of Heart. I think one of the reasons I love your book so much is that the characters have community. They have family, or the chosen community, or chosen family, or birth family. But so the romance between the principals is powerful, powerful, powerful. It's the center. It's but the community that surrounds them and supports them is not always present, on stage. They're not always right there, but you always feel that those characters are somehow, even your most isolated characters, like even those who have become isolated because of some reason or not, or for some reason, they must do some such like Jess, Nikki, right? So she's got this chosen family and her own family, and this is from Change of Heart.
Yes.
And she's completely on her own, and you feel she, I mean, that is raw and painful, and yet there is peace to her because there is this groundedness somewhere, this place where she can go back to. And so I mean, I love that, a novel that gives that kind of community while focusing, however, on the principles. That's the perfect novel.
And I'm forever going to have the image of being held, while you're melting down.
Yeah.
In context of all of this, because yes, you're absolutely right, these characters, even Libby is being held by how she was raised by this adopted father in all her experiences, that belief, and for so much of our internal confidence and belief of what we can do is from that being held, because you can break down as long as you're being held.
Right.
So that's just beautiful, and so is he. I mean, his for all the awfulness he's seen, the steadfastness of his family when he had them is what fuels him now. So I do have questions, and we have 10 minutes, but let me take one question, because I do not want to end this interview without talking about immigrant angst and how you handle that. So we have from Facebook, from Supriya Kumar. Hi Supriya, thank you. She says, it's a comment. She says, fascinating to listen to the process. So much respect for you both. Thank you, Supriya. And also from Judith in San Diego. Did you base your characters on any historical instances of women cross-dressing to break gender barriers? Great question, Judith. Thank you.
Judith. Yes, in fact, I had the idea of Libby, and I knew that she wanted to be a surgeon, and I had initially, all right, this is the backstory of the writing process. Initially, I knew she wanted to be a surgeon, and I knew he was a painter, and I didn't yet know what the story would be. And then I went to I was in Edinburgh actually researching The Duke, the previous novel in the series. I was doing some work, and I was walking down the street, and I passed Surgeons Hall. And Surgeons Hall was built at about the time that this novel is, just a little after my novel is set. And it was it's the home of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. And I went in, and there were museums, and I discovered the existence of Charles Bell. Sir Charles Bell is a surgeon at this time, and also an artist, an extraordinarily beautiful artist.
He's in the book.
He's in the book. Now, he's in London during most of this time, so I brought him back to Edinburgh for a short while. But as I was wandering through the museum, and I discovered Charles Bell, and I thought, well, okay, Libby can ask Ziadine if he will paint paintings and sign her name, her pretend name, or her name to it. So Charles Bell will think that she's as great a painter, and so maybe she could be as great a medical person. And she's not thinking about being a man or a boy at this point. She's just thinking, well, women are mostly not doing portraiture. So if I pretend that I can do portraiture, so I'm going to have this portrait artist secretly paint paintings with my name. So that's Libby's idea. And then, so that was the idea. And my head was exploding. I was like, oh my gosh, I can bring them together now, right? And maybe she can be Charles Bell's apprentice as a woman. And then, in the gift shop, I discovered the biography of Dr. James Barry. And Dr. James Barry was born a woman, an Irish woman, and when she was 19, Margaret, her name was, she was 19, she moved to Edinburgh and entered medical school as James Barry, and she finished medical school. She had a foreign patron who was intending to go back and rule his home country, who was one of the ways that I made the story. I sort of borrowed from that as well. I borrowed lots of things from James Barry's story. And he lived the rest of his life as a doctor, and no one knew that he had been a woman. And I thought, okay, so this is real, and it happened in 1809. Margaret Buckley went to Edinburgh and became James Barry in 1809, which is a decade and a half before the prince happened. So I thought, okay, if this happened in reality, this is a real story, then I think I could make it happen for Libby too. So that's how I came up with that. So yes, absolutely. There are other stories of women who have dressed as men to accomplish certain goals, and then there are stories of people who were transgender and they were dressing as men not to accomplish a particular goal, but because that is who they were. So yeah, the history is fascinating, and it's endlessly complex and wonderful, and gives full of courage.
Absolutely, and she was, and James Barry was never found out. No, was
well, there were several moments in his life when people did discover. One of them I borrowed for the book. Like James Barry got very, very ill, and some of his fellow medical guys came in to tend him, but it was always hushed up. So it didn't come out until a couple of years, or actually after his death, and it was the woman who was preparing his body for burial to go to essentially the funeral, and it was really hushed up.
And that's more of that holding, because obviously there were people who thought that this was a good enough surgeon that she needed to keep on doing what she needed to keep on doing, which is, and again, change is always the realization of a few people that this must happen, because it's right. So that's it's beautiful. But let's quickly talk about. Let me see. Okay, no more questions. Thanks again, Judith, for the question. And okay, so let's talk about Ziadin, who starts out being a refugee, turns into an immigrant, and then actually takes his new home into his heart and becomes off there. And again, for me, for obvious reasons, that felt very authentic. That felt not skimmed over, and because I mean, this is a thing that I think people who have never migrated don't know, but that's a love story in itself. You actually go through, it's either a love story or an arranged marriage that ends in love, that kind of thing, where you fall in love with a place for reasons that it speaks to you. And he does that, he opines about that, and that's beautifully done. And I want you to talk a little bit about what that was like, and where that came from. His immigrant angst is taking this country into his heart, and creating, and how you created Tabir, which are two slightly different questions, but why and how you created a country.
Wow, that's a big question. I think I mean the quick and easy answer, which is is that these characters, that when they come to you and they feel honest, like they feel authentically, they're the story, they are. Sometimes it happens this way. I mean, hopefully most of the time it happens this way, when the characters say, this is my story. And I think, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, I know that every sentence, every phrase, every moment of his experience, I wanted it to be honest, and I don't know how to explain it otherwise. I mean, I can explain it in terms of just in general, in terms of my scholarship, my husband's scholarship, the work that I do, and the friends that I have in the university, like these are conversations we have every day. These are books we're reading and things we're talking about every day. So it feels very familiar to me. It's not my story. It's not my own story. I'm not an immigrant to the United States, but the stories that we my colleagues, my husband and my colleagues and I talk about, it's constant conversation. It's constantly reading the sources. And I read the sources of people who moved to Britain from elsewhere, from outside of the British Empire, which was vast, of course, and from the British Empire, other places in the British Empire, colonized people. I read their stories and I read stories. So I think it just felt, I don't know how to explain it. I wish I could articulate it better, but I think it just felt this is who he was. And he had a horribly traumatic experience for much of his youth, so that changed him profoundly. And as we know, tragedy changes us. So.
Yes, and it changes him in good ways, because tragedy can change us in both ways.
Exactly, right.
Which is great. And that whole travel of coming into himself, of dealing with his tragedy, is almost in parallel, which often I think is the case, in parallel with his relationship with his home and the place he's in, and how that changes. Also, I think it has to be mentioned that this is a historical romance hero who is Muslim. So
he was.
Well,
he's not religious anymore.
Muslim.
But yes, but he's yeah.
But I love that he uses the word Allah. It is which to me again felt really authentic, of coming from, because it not only is, I mean, it's often that, you know, in the world today we all go like, oh my God, someone said the God word and someone said the Allah word, and you know, someone said, oh Krishna, and you know, but often it's just it's linguistics, right? It's part of how a person who has spent a childhood speaking a certain vocabulary it's also that. And it would be strange for it not to be that.
So I lived in Italy for several years while I was doing my graduate degree, and I learned phrases that, I lived in Rome, and Italy is very regional and very particular, so I lived in Rome, and I learned phrases that Romans said that I hadn't known in English, and I still can't. I mean, they're words that are translatable into English, but the phrases, the idiomatic phrases themselves, it's about thinking in a different way, right? And that's why some things are so hard to translate, because you can't translate exactly. So I think that that's natural to me, to think that a character, and the only challenge is that since I am not writing, his story is not my story, I need to get a lot of advice, and I got a lot of extraordinary advice from people who really do know, and I'm grateful. There's an epically long author's note, because I'm so grateful for all the people who helped me, all the artists and all the scholars and all the medical people and the writers. It's just, I'm very, very grateful for the help I got.
Yes, and it all shows. The depth of him. He did feel, again, very authentic to me. So that is, I love this book.
That means so much to me. Thank you.
That's great. And we are out of time, but before we go, and I have all of these questions, and I'm so out of time, but that author's note is great, because there's like grave robbing in there, and there's so much of that whole research thing which you can go and read in the author's note.
There's more history on my website. There's so much history in this book that I couldn't fit it all in the author's note.
And you must absolutely read the book. It is just $7.99 from Avon Books. Order it from us. Or read it, just read it. It's so fabulous. But before we go, I did want to, I know I'm getting like big eyes from our producer, but I did want to, because you know, you address poverty, you address this fabulous way in which she deals with her own sexuality like a doctor. So there's a lot of that, you know, that scientist mindedness that I wanted to talk about. But before we go, I want you to address what direction you think historical romance is going in, and how personally you're taking it somewhere, and do you have feelings about that?
Yes, I have feelings. I have my principal feeling about, I don't know the direction that historical romance is going in, or romance period, but who knows, right? But I'm incredibly excited about the diversity of stories. This story has a hero who's a person of color. It has a heroine who is neurotypical. I am not the only person doing this, right? There are lots of people doing this now. And I have to give a shout out actually to the women, the readers of I have a Facebook book club, and it's called the Feminist Romance Lovers Book Club. And we have been talking this week about diverse romance, but specifically about non-typical characters. And they are the most brilliant, most wonderful group of readers. I love to listen to them. They are so well read, and they have fantastic recommendations. They love your books. So the shout out to them. But I'm thrilled that that there are writers writing, that there are readers reading, that there are publishers publishing, that the move is toward, that's what excites me about 18th and 19th century history. It's that this global history, and I love writing about it because it's troubled, and there's so much story to be told, right? And there's so many love stories in it. So I love it that that's happening in historical romance. I love it that it's happening in contemporary romance. It's an exciting moment.
That's great.
And more.
Yes. And thank you for being a player in that. And thank you for being here today. I have so many more questions. Her Facebook group, book club, is great. So you can find it on Facebook through your Facebook page. So go check that out. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks, Katharine.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to do our little outro. And it says here, we are reaching the end of time, and we have reached the end of time 10 minutes ago. However, we've been talking about The Prince from Avon Books, $7.99, signed copies available from us. And again, thank you, Avon. Upcoming shows. All right, the upcoming shows are Lady Bird and Friends. Author Chris Rylander, I hope I said that right, will be here along with host Betsy Bird to discuss the new epic adventure series for middle grade readers, The Legend of Greg, Book 1, in the Failures series. Chris joins us June 12th at 5:30 p.m. Then on Solved, author Victoria Thompson will join host Libby Hellman to discuss her new thriller, Murder on Union Square. That's on Thursday, June 14th at noon. On Lit with Love, we have coming up next Sarah McLean, and that will be at the end of June. You can find details on the website, or if you follow me on social media, I will post it. And August 30th, we will have Brenda Novak. So do come back for that. Thank you so much for being here. If you're watching this on YouTube after the broadcast, you can still order signed books from authorsvoice.net. This is Sonali Dev signing off. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Katharine.
Thank you.